In this video we're going to look at what's new in VCarve Pro version 8, and we're going to concentrate on the drawing tools that were enhanced and added to the software. In other videos we're going to look at the 2D and 2.5D machining changes and also look at the brand new functionality for VCarve Pro 8 with its ability to import, assemble and machine 3D models. Before we create a new part, I just want to take a moment to show you some changes that have been made to the interface when we first open the software, and also look at the new tutorial video browser. If we come into the interface here, we can see we've got the icons that we'd expect from the traditional layout to create a new file, open an existing one and access to recently opened files. Then as we come down the sidebar here, you can see we've got access to this tutorial video browser that I'll come back to in a moment. There are links to various online resources here, and then finally at the bottom we have access to websites where you can buy three-dimensional clip art, and this can be bought in a format that it's now possible to bring into VCarve Pro and create assemblies from. So these websites, Design and Make and Vector Art 3D, are particularly applicable now to users of VCarve Pro 8. Now coming back up to the tutorial video browser, if we click on this link here, that's going to open a web browser. It'll open your default web browser, although this is actually showing you a file which is installed with the software, so is on your hard drive. This allows us to access all the training videos that have been created for VCarve Pro 8. These are either new examples or existing examples that have been re-recorded using the latest version of the software. There are two ways that we can browse these now, either by category or by project. If we click on the button to view the tutorials by category, we can see them listed here, and we have the option to actually click on the item to collapse all at the top and then look through the list of different topics that we can watch tutorials on. If we want to, we can come and click on any of these and expand that area to see the tutorials that are involved, and all of those are going to relate to something to do with 2.5D toolpaths. If we go back to the home and we browse by project, instead of looking at particular topics to do with functions in the software, we can look at individual projects. Again, if we collapse all here, what we can do is browse through and you can see different individual projects. And some of these will have different numbers of videos in them depending what's being covered. So for instance, if we come in here and we look at vector textures, we can see, if we scroll down there, that there are actually 3 different videos that relate to that topic: the drawing, 2D toolpaths and 2.5D toolpaths. So this ability to look either by project or by category makes it really easy to find the tutorial that's going to be most helpful for what you want to learn about. When we look at an individual tutorial, if we just click on View Tutorials and look at the ball's head here, what we're displayed will depend on whether we've got a local copy of the tutorials, so we've maybe installed them off a disk or we've already downloaded them, or as I am in this case, I'm just looking at them online. If I'm looking at them online, I'll still have the ability to play the video, but I can also download it to view it offline at a later stage, and I can also download the files that are applicable to this example so I can work along with the video in my own copy of the software. So now we've had a look at the new tutorial video browser, let's just close that. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to set up a job which is 24 by 16, and we're going to make this 1 inch thick, work with the datum in the lower left corner, and we'll just go ahead and hit OK. For this example, what I'd like to do is create a simple sign with a textured background. To help me lay out my vectors, I have created a sketch of what I would like that sign to look like. If we come up and click on the icon here to import vectors from a file, just before we select the file that I'm going to open, I would like to mention at this stage that the SKP import has been updated now so that it is compatible with files created in SketchUp 2015. So that's new in version 8. In addition, version 8 will install as a 64-bit version if you're running a 64-bit operating system, and that offers all kinds of advantages when working with very large amounts of imported data or calculating particularly complex shapes or toolpaths. Now for this example, I want to open this PDF file. Now this PDF only contains an image, it contains no vectors, and in the previous versions of the software it would have given me an error saying that it only contained bitmap data and would not have been able to open any of that information. I'd have had to open the PDF separately and maybe capture the image and then save it as a JPEG and import that. Now in version 8 here I can hit open, and even though there is no vector data in it, the software will still import the image for me, and in the same way it would have with the vectors, it'll just put that on a layer with the same name as the file that we've imported. So that's a nice improvement there, the ability to extract bitmap data out of a PDF file. If there's multiple images in it, then they'll just come in on layers that are relevant to the particular page they're on in the PDF document. To help us do the vector layout for our sign, we're going to use the guidelines, and these have been significantly enhanced in version 8. Let's just center the image for a moment, and as we could before, let's just create our first guide by clicking and dragging from the ruler on the side. Now if I right mouse click on that, we open the guide properties, and you'll notice there's a new section in here that allows us to create angled guidelines. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Here I just want to create a guideline relative to our first one, 22 inches from it, and click on the button to create new guides. That 22 inches just derives from the notation I've got here that we want the sign to be approximately 22 inches across. If we just zoom out with the mouse wheel now, click to go into transform mode, and holding shift I'm just going to drag this, scale it up so that the corners are approximately in line with my guides there. Let's just click to deselect that. Next I'm going to click and drag a couple of other guides, just holding shift down so these don't snap to the whole numbers. Click and drag this down here, so that's just giving me the corners there. Then I'm going to click and drag another one and just put that in the middle of the job so I know where the center is. Now the new feature here is my ability to come in and right mouse click and choose the option for guidelines, and as before I can insert horizontal and vertical, but I can also now insert an angled guideline. This will either let me specify an angle, or I can click on the button to say through 2 points, and now I can snap to the intersection of those two guides, and then just click and snap an arbitrary position from the image there so that I've got my angled guide which matches the drawing. We can just right mouse click in order to exit out of that mode. Now we could come over and click on the draw polyline tool, and I'm just going to snap to the intersection of these guidelines here so that we can draw our vector. Just right mouse click to accept that. It's a little difficult to see the vector in selected mode, but we can just click in the corner here between the tool rules to toggle off the visibility of the guidelines. Then just click, and now we can see the vector we've drawn with the help of those guides. Now, as well as toggling the visibility with the icon in the corner there, I can also come up and say View, Guidelines, Delete All Guides as well. And that allows me to show you one other new feature with the guides, and that's their ability to now snap to the geometry. Before we could snap geometry to guides, but we couldn't snap a guide onto an existing vector. These are much more usable now by the fact I could click and drag this across, and I can actually pick up things like the midpoint. I can pick up the corner there, we can snap to that, I can snap to the corner there, as well as the standard kind of snapping that we have with the guides before as well. So you'll find now in version 8 that the guides are much more usable than they were previously. Now at this stage we might want to come up and save the file, and go to File, Save As, and I'm just going to save this as 1815 sign and hit Save. Now you may have noticed there when we went to File, Save As, there's an option now called Increment and Save, and we're going to come back to that later. By using that option or the shortcut Ctrl-Alt-S, what it allows us to do is just save a new version of the file without overwriting the existing one. So when we've made a few more edits, in a few minutes we'll go ahead and make an incremental save to this, and that allows us to keep track of all the different versions of the file as we progress through the design. The next new feature I want to look at is mirror node editing. If we select the vector we've created here and hit N on the keyboard to go into node editing, I'm just going to hover over this span and hit B to turn that into a Bezier, hit B to turn this bottom one into a Bezier, so we've got these curves. And if I just drag a box around these two nodes and shift and drag a box around these two nodes, With the old version, I could easily move those up and down so that they remained in sync with each other using the arrow keys on the keyboard. However, now I've got the option while in node editing to hit V or H to do vertical or horizontal symmetry. In this case, I want vertical symmetry, so I'd hit V on the keyboard. You can see we get this dotted line here, and now if I use the arrow keys and move these up, you'll notice that the top one moves up, but this one moves symmetrically away from the line there. So basically it's just creating mirrored symmetry around it. I'll show you the horizontal one in a moment. So that adds even more flexibility to the already very powerful node editing in the software. Now let's create a copy of this vector. Now here I'm not going to show you any new features, but I am going to give you an example of just how powerful the shortcut keys are in the software. If we hit escape to go out of node editing, I can hit Control A to select all the vectors. I can hit Control Shift H to make a horizontal copy across the center of the job. Control A again to select all the vectors, J for join, hit enter in order to execute that, and escape to go out of that function. Now if we hit Control A again to reselect that vector, go back into node editing mode, and then hit H in order to go into the horizontal editing, you can see we've done a whole different load of operations there only by using the keyboard input. Now I could have used the icons in order to do the same thing, but it just gives you an example of how powerful and quick you can work in this software once you learn these shortcut keys. Let's go ahead now with the horizontal node editing or mirror node editing switched on, and I'm going to select this control point here, select this control point here, and as well as using the arrow keys, I can also do the node editing just by using the mouse itself. And again there you can see how that's mirroring across my line, and in this case I just want to add a bit more curvature into that bottom area there. If I like the way that looks, I can hit escape to go out of node editing mode. So now we want to offset that to create the border for our sign. Need to know roughly what that distance is here. So if we click on the icon to measure, go from the center and roughly click somewhere on the drawing there, I can see that's approximately 1 inch in distance. So if we select that, offset that inwards by 1 inch, say offset and close. So there we've got the border for our sign. Now at this stage we may want to create an incremental copy of this, so not overwriting the original but using the new feature that I mentioned before. Can come up to File, say Increment and Save, and the software will automatically take the name of the file that we had before, and in this case it's put an _1 on the end of it. If we go to File, Save As, we can see now there's the original copy and there's the new copy that we've saved there. So that just allows us to keep making iterative versions of our file without losing any of the stages that we've got as we work our way through a project. Next, I'd like to create some text. So I'm going to come over, click on the text icon, use the trebuchet font and just type 1815 with a text height of 7, hit Apply, close, F9 to center that, and we'll just use the edit text spacing tool here in order to close up the spacing in between these numbers. So there we've pretty much completed the basic layout for our sign. So at this stage I would just like to do a bit of organization of my part. You can see I've been creating everything on the current layer, which is the one that we imported the image on. So I'm just going to hit Control A to select all the vectors, right mouse click and move those onto layer 1. We'll click on the Layers tab. I'm just going to adjust the order and switch off the import layer and select layer 1 so that it's current. We'll go back to the drawing tab. At this point I'd like to make a slight modification to the design of the sign and add a rectangular area below our number that we're going to pocket out when we come to the toolpathing stage. Just click on the icon to draw a rectangle and I make a shape that's 8 inches by 2 inches. We'll select that, hit F9 on the keyboard to center it, and then just holding the shift key down we'll click and drag that so that it's just below the number. Select both those entities and hit F9 in order to center them in the middle of the job. Let's just click in order to deselect those. Now let's just select this inner border, the number, and our rectangle and hit G on the keyboard to group them together. We'll come back to those in a moment. Now I'm going to create a vector pattern which could act as sort of a background texture. So I'm going to click draw an arc. I'm going to snap to the point here. We're just going to come up and click and just create an arc shape there. Now I'm going to say I want to create a linear array of these, and in this case we're going to create one row in Y. I'm going to create 50 rows in X with an offset value of 0.4 and a Y offset of 0, and hit copy. And I can see I haven't quite created enough there, so if I hit Control Z and type in say 70 and hit copy, now I've got enough to cover the back of the sign. I'm going to hit G in order to group those together, and I'm going to hit Control Shift and H in order to create an opposite copy of them. Now I'm going to select both sets of those vectors there. I'm going to carefully come in and zoom in and select this group here. Let's just hit F to fit again there, and we can look at another new function here, trim selected objects to a boundary. Now in the previous version of the software I'd have had to manually trim these vectors, and that would have been very time consuming. Now I can select this option here, and it will look at the last group of objects or the last vector that I selected as the trimming boundary, and everything else I've selected it's going to trim to that particular set of vectors. So in this case we have the number, rectangle and our inner border vector grouped together. So if I say clear inside a boundary and say clear, you can see that it automatically trims all those vectors out there. If I hit Control Z to undo that, I could say clear outside a boundary and say clear and close, and then we could hit G on the keyboard in order to group all those vectors together again. And now I may want to take those, right mouse click and move them onto a new layer, and we'll just call that layer hatch and make it invisible and inactive. But that is a very powerful command, that ability to trim many vectors at once, either to an individual vector or a group of vectors as we did there. Now for the part we're going to machine, I'm actually going to create our background texture in a slightly different way, and we'll come to that in a moment. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes here to do a little bit of vector organization before we move on to that and look at the machining. First thing I want to do is just select these vectors, ungroup them again, and I'm just going to select the inner vector border and the number, and we're going to offset those vectors, and I'd like to offset them inwards by 0.15 of an inch. I'm going to create sharp corners and select new and hit offset and close, and I'm just going to hit G on the keyboard to group that new set of vectors together. I'm going to delete the vector that we had here before for the inner border. I'm going to select the number, and I'm going to offset that inwards by 1/8 of an inch in this case, create sharp corners and delete the original and hit offset again there, close, and once more we'll hit G in order to group that together as well. I'm planning to machine this example by using the vector selector in the toolpath strategies to help me choose vectors on a particular layer. So let's take a moment to just organize these onto layers that are relevant to how they're going to be machined. So working through, we'll select the inner text, right mouse click, move that onto a new layer that I'll call vcarve text. I'm going to make that invisible and inactive. I'm going to select this group of outlines here, right mouse click, move that to a new layer that I'm going to call V profile and make that invisible and inactive. Select this vector, right mouse click, move to a new layer and we'll call that one pocket, and again make it invisible and inactive. That leaves just this vector on layer 1. So layer 1, we can come in, I could click on the icon here and go to rename, and we'll call that cutout profile and hit close. It's also just going to switch off the visibility of that for the moment as well. The reason that I've momentarily turned the layers off is so that I can demonstrate another very powerful drawing tool that's been added to version 8. If we come over, you can see there's a new icon here. If we click on this, we come into the Create Vector Texture function. To start with, I'm just going to create some of these using the blank workspace that we have. Then we'll go ahead and switch back on some of our border vectors in order to create the background texture for our sign. So for the first pattern that we're going to generate with this, let's just set the values to be fairly straightforward. I'm going to put in an angle of 0, spacing of 1, I'm going to turn the variation off for the moment, amplitude of 1, wavelength of 12, and we'll turn the noise right down as well. And I'm going to ask the software to create the vectors for this on a layer called texture, and we don't have a layer called texture at the moment, so that will just be a new layer that's generated by the function. If we hit preview, we can see the simple set of waves that we get with the values that we've entered here. Now it's very easy for us to create an infinite number of unique variations just by editing any one of these values or by editing multiple values at once. For instance, we may want to dramatically increase the amplitude, so we can see that there, shorten the wavelength so that we tighten up the shape, change the angle here so that we go to 60 degrees, so now it's kind of flowing in a totally different direction than it was before. We can add some randomness into the texture here by increasing the randomness of the variation. If we hit preview now, you can see it's no longer going to give us a consistent spacing between these, and we can increase that as much or as little as we want to create much more interesting natural textures. As well as changing the variation for the spacing, we can also introduce noise into this as well. So if we preview that, now you can see how that's changing the type of vectors that we're going to get. Now in this case, what I'd like to do is not have something really that looks like a wave, but something that looks more like a natural grain pattern. So I'm going to enter an angle of 2 degrees. I'm going to change the spacing to 0.15 of an inch. I'm going to introduce some variation to that. I'm going to change the amplitude to be very low, 0.2, put in a very long wavelength and turn the noise down to maybe about a quarter of the full potential and hit preview. And now you can see if we zoom in there that we've just got a slight bit of variation in there that's just creating this kind of interesting sort of slightly randomized grain pattern. And you'll see how effective this is in our actual design itself in a moment. So if I was to hit OK there, we can take a look at that. There we've got a set of vectors that have been created on the layer called texture as indicated in the function. And when we fill the complete work area like this, it would be easy now for us to go over, calculate a toolpath that run along those vectors and machine an entire textured panel. Now it may be though that we want to actually create those inside of a specific area on the job. So if I just select those and delete them, let's just switch on the V profile layer here and hit close. And if we select that and come into the function and take exactly the same parameters but with a vector selected and hit preview, now the software is going to generate a set of vectors based on the values that we've entered into the form but limited inside of the area of the selected vectors that we have in the 2D view at the moment. These have still been created on the texture layer, so that's going to make it easy for me to select those when we come to machine them. And if I hit OK at this point, I'm just going to switch on the pocket layer and the VCarve text layer and also our cutout profile layer. And at that stage, if we just click to deselect them, that's all the vectors we're going to need to machine this. So once again there, completely new function, that ability to generate a vector texture. And as you saw there, they can be very regular repeating waves, or we can start to introduce the random nature into them for the spacing and the noise in order to generate something like this grain pattern that we've got here. Now again at this stage we may want to increment and save a new version of the file here, so the shortcut to do this would be Control-Alt-S, and if I click on that it'll just take a moment and you can see that the number at the top here is incremented to 2. If I went to File, Save As, I can see I've got the original file, increment 1 and increment 2 now, and every time I hit Control-Alt-S I would just get a new incremental copy of our design. So that concludes the first of our What's New tutorials. In the second one we're going to take this same design and we're going to look at the enhancements and new tools that are available for 2D and 2.5D machining. Thanks for watching.